decent.
Rita Hayworth was once the queen of Columbia Pictures. In the 1940s, a dazzling musical star and a sensual icon the whole world adored. On screen, she was a dream-a-light, a woman who made millions believe Hollywood could create perfection. But in real life, Rita's story was nothing like a dream. Behind that glow was a life filled with fractures, from a wounded childhood, 5 broken marriages, to her final years sinking into loneliness and fading memory. But Rita was not the only one carrying that tragedy. Her siblings were also pulled into heavy losses, turning this story from the sorrow of a star into the tragedy of an entire family. And that is the most painful part, because behind the icon the world worshipped was a home that was never truly at peace. Do not look away. The final tragedy in this story will bring you to tears. A tragic little girl abused by her own father, and the dream of reaching Hollywood. Rita Hayworth's real name was Margarita Carmen Cancino, born on October 17, 1918, in Brooklyn, New York City. But then, the global economic crisis struck many middle-class families in New York, including Rita's. Rita Hayworth's father became an alcoholic. This man, named Eduardo Cancino, often treated his young wife Volga, his 2 older sons, and his daughter Carmen in a strict and hurtful way. When she was 13, as Eduardo watched Carmen dance, he suddenly came up with a new plan. He decided to pull Rita out of school to make money. At 13, instead of studying, Rita had to go to Mexican nightclubs and dance late into the night to bring money home to her alcoholic father. At just 13, she was a quiet, reserved girl living under the shadow of a deeply demanding and controlling father. He pushed her relentlessly, molding her to meet the harsh expectations of the adult world at the expense of her own childhood. In truth, Margarita had no grand ambitions. Her only dream was a simple, quiet life, with a family who would truly care for her. Eager to please, she followed her father's path, enduring the exhausting and unglamorous realities of working too young. Instead of teenage memories, Rita carried the weight of late-night performances and the cold, harsh environments of a grown-up world, a burden that haunted her dreams for years. The father-daughter dance duo became very popular, and gradually the reputation of the Cancino dancing group was restored. At this time, many talent agents began to notice her. But her fuller body, stuttering voice, and strong Spanish accent could not take her beyond small roles dancing beside famous actor Spencer Tracy in L'Enfer, and a small contract she had just signed with Fox was quickly canceled. But she realized she had to become famous, had to escape her father's control to survive. So Rita threw herself into training, reshaping her body and correcting her speech. She studied Hollywood beauty trends and tried to apply them to herself. Rita spent nearly 3 years transforming her appearance. From a young woman with Latin beauty and 3 lineages, American, English, Irish, she became an American beauty icon. She had to lose weight, relearn how to speak, walk, and dress, pluck her hairline to create a higher forehead, endure painful electrolysis sessions, and dye her hair auburn. When color films emerged, Margarita Carmen Cancino changed her name to Rita Hayworth and became a beauty, a sex symbol, lighting up the screen in the 1940s. Rita had a special gift. Her acting style perfectly matched the fiery body nature had given her. She made Hollywood surge with her roles as a passionate redhead in Only Angels Have Wings, Blood and Sand, and at her peak in Gilda in 1946. The character Gilda, brought to life brilliantly by Rita, became a true goddess of love for movie fans. Rita herself once sighed, "The men I know all fall in love with Gilda." From that role, she became a new beauty icon of the screen with the image of a love goddess. Completely different from the passionate, seductive, and energetic Gilda, Rita Hayworth in real life was a gentle, shy woman afraid of crowds who only wished to be loved and to live a simple life with a husband and children. But the men who loved and married her never gave her that. Instead, they used her money and abused her both physically and emotionally. Loved deeply, but received very little. Men loved Rita greatly, but they were only captivated by her fiery, sexy image on screen and felt unfamiliar with the shy, timid Rita in real life. Rita once admitted she always longed for a complete family. That was likely why she married 5 times. At 19, she had her first marriage with the man she loved deeply, director James Hills. For Rita, Edward Judson was not just a lover, but also a benefactor who brought her to the doors of Hollywood. Giving all her trust and love, Rita eventually realized bitterly that she was only an actress, a money-making tool for a materialistic husband. Her first marriage ended after 5 years with countless beatings and pain. After the painful marriage with Edward Judson, Rita found love with director and actor Orson Welles. Life seemed peaceful after they had their first daughter together. It seemed that the child would strengthen their marriage, but it did not. Orson Welles began to reveal his unfaithful nature, frequently involved with other women. The pain of jealousy once pushed Rita toward thoughts of ending her life. Unable to endure the pain of sharing her husband and the loneliness inside her own home, Rita decided to divorce Orson. Even though Orson caused her so much pain, she later admitted this was the most unforgettable love of her life. 2 years after separating from Orson, Rita married Prince Ali Khan, a wealthy playboy. But Rita soon realized the difference between them. She could not adapt to the lavish palace life, while Ali Khan grew tired of a shy woman. After giving birth to their daughter Yasmina, they quickly separated. After leaving her third husband, Rita returned to the United States with her 2 daughters, and at that time she met singer Dick Haynes. His charm and warmth quickly melted the heart of the mother of 2. They quickly married, fueled by Rita's naive belief in a happy marriage. But Rita did not realize that Dick was simply an incapable man who wanted to use her fame to rise and drain her money. After marriage, Rita was frequently abused due to Dick's reckless spending habits. The money she had saved could not cover his massive debts, and they separated. After 4 marriages, Rita believed she could never find another man. Yet she fell again for her 5th husband, director James Hills. But once again, she misjudged love. Her 5th husband also used her fame to survive in Hollywood. The 5th time was also the last. Rita filed for divorce in 1961 when she was 43 years old. 5 men passed through her life, each leaving wounds too deep to ever heal. After 5 marriages, Rita was no longer the fiery, seductive actress. Time left its marks on the face of a once goddess of Hollywood. The 5th time was also the last. Rita filed for divorce in 1961 when she was 43 years old. When the public thought she was losing control, but the truth was that illness was already arriving. As Rita Hayworth entered her 40s and then her 50s, she began moving into a period where the beauty was still there, the fame was still there, but the strength inside was no longer what it had once been. To put it plainly, her decline did not begin with a loud collapse. It came slowly, quietly, almost silently, like a room losing its light little by little, until the person standing inside does not notice the exact moment the darkness truly takes over. After too many years of being shaped into an icon, Rita gradually grew tired of the very image the whole world still wanted her to carry. She had lived too long in other people's eyes, too long under the expectation that she had to be beautiful, seductive, alluring, had to be Rita Hayworth of the silver screen, and was not allowed to simply be a woman growing older, growing weary, needing rest like anyone else. At that exact moment, Hollywood was no longer the Hollywood that had once lifted her to the top. The era had changed. New faces had appeared. Audience taste had shifted. The star system she had once stood at the center of was beginning to move. The screen that had once belonged to Rita no longer opened itself to her in the same way. That was the first shock, but it was not the deepest pain. The real pain was that her unraveling was not just a matter of a slowing career. It was the result of years spent living under constant pressure of a childhood without freedom of marriages that drained her dry of a life that always required her to perform even when there was nothing left inside to give. Rita was not only tired because Hollywood had turned away. Rita was tired because she had been forced to be an icon for too long. Then the strange signs began to appear. At first they were small enough to be overlooked. She forgot lines. For an actress who had lived by discipline and the rhythm of work, that was a telling sign. Sometimes she forgot appointments, forgot the time, forgot things that had just been mentioned moments before. At times she could not remember the names of people she had once worked with. Taken separately, each of those things could be explained away easily. Just tired. Just stressed. Just age. But when they repeated, piled up, and began slipping into the way she carried herself in front of others, everything changed. Rita became out of step in conversation. There were moments when she reacted slowly, moments when she seemed confused, moments when she looked as if she were standing inside a familiar scene, but could no longer connect the pieces. From the outside, those signs were very easy to mistake for erratic behavior, unpredictability, or a loss of control. And that was when the real tragedy began. Because instead of being seen as someone facing a health problem, Rita was seen as an aging star slipping away from herself. Friends began whispering. People in the business began quietly telling one another that she was no longer well. Some directors and colleagues saw her as difficult to work with, unstable, no longer able to maintain the professional standard she once had. The tabloids did exactly what tabloids always do to famous women who begin to weaken. They did not look for the cause. They looked for the easiest story to sell. Rita was described as unstable, erratic, overly emotional, even burdened with the image of an alcoholic or a woman collapsing under old age. In that way of seeing her, the public no longer saw a human being sending out signals for help. They only saw an icon breaking down. The bitter part is that those reactions were not entirely random. They were a very typical product of the way Hollywood and the media treated women once they could no longer maintain their old image. When a beautiful star, young in the public memory and once in control of every gesture, suddenly becomes confused, slow, or hard to understand, people rarely think of illness first. They think of decline, they think of drinking, they think of emotional instability, they think of a star who cannot accept that her time has passed. Rita was trapped inside exactly that kind of cruel interpretation. The world did not give her the right to be sick. It only gave her one final role, a legend deteriorating right in front of the public. But the truth was far sadder. What was happening inside Rita was not a personality crisis, nor was it simply the result of stress. It was a neurological process, quietly taking away her memory, her cognitive rhythm, and her ability to connect with the world around her. The problem was that at that time Alzheimer's was not yet understood as widely or as clearly as it would be later. Public awareness of the disease was still very limited. What today might quickly lead people to think of dementia was back then often blamed on age, alcohol, or emotional collapse. Rita became ill in exactly the period when the world did not yet have language precise enough to name what was happening to her. So she was not only forced to endure the disease itself, she also had to endure the blindness of an entire era. That is where the greatest tragedy of this period lies. Rita was not only sick, she was misunderstood for nearly an entire decade. For years, what the public thought they were witnessing was the fall of a faded movie star, a woman who could no longer hold on to her old radiance, an icon slipping off her own pedestal. But what they were actually witnessing was a woman with Alzheimer's being stripped of her memory piece by piece, day after day. In other words, while the world was judging Rita's behavior, her brain had already begun betraying her from within. That is what makes this period far more painful than an ordinary story of professional decline. If it had only been fame fading, Rita still could have explained herself, responded, defended herself. But with a slowly progressing neurological illness, Even the person living through it sometimes cannot fully understand what is happening. That confusion made her even more likely to withdraw. That withdrawal, in turn, made the public even more convinced that something suspicious or broken was happening. It was a very cruel spiral. The weaker Rita became, the colder the world grew. The less she could explain, the more people believed the wrong explanation. And perhaps that is the saddest part of this entire chapter of her life. After all the years she had been forced into becoming a model of seduction, after all the marriages that wore her down, after all the effort to live up to the role the world pressed upon her, what Rita received in her most fragile moment was not compassion, but suspicion. No one looked at her like a patient. No one rushed to see her as a human being in need of understanding. They looked at her as a rumor, a warning, a sad Hollywood story. And so, in the final stretch, just as illness was entering her life, Rita Hayworth fell once again into the old tragedy that had followed her for years. The world was still looking at her, but it still did not truly see her. The invisible battle. What made the final chapter of Rita Hayworth's life so painful was not only that she had Alzheimer's, but that the disease arrived at a time when the world had almost no way to name it properly. Today, when people mention Alzheimer's, they are familiar with signs like short-term memory, loss, confusion, changes in behavior, withdrawal from conversation, or failing to recognize familiar faces. But in Rita's time, awareness of the disease was still very limited. It had not yet been widely understood by the public, nor seen clearly enough by the media or the entertainment industry. So almost everything she showed was interpreted the wrong way. What was happening to Rita was not seen as the sign of a progressive neurological illness. It was read as instability, emotional decline, or the result of alcohol and age. The public saw a former star fading away. The press saw an easy headline. Hollywood saw a star who could no longer be trusted. Very few people stopped to ask whether there might be a serious medical problem behind that confusion. That was the cruelest part. Rita was not only suffering through illness, she also had to live inside almost total misunderstanding. Little by little, Rita began pulling away from public life. She avoided events, avoided interviews, avoided even the world that had once lifted her up as an icon. From the outside, that retreat could be mistaken for bitterness or surrender. But in truth, it was closer to helplessness. Rita did not disappear because she wanted to. She moved away from the public because she could not explain something that she herself did not yet fully understand. When a person feels their memory beginning to crack, their sense of safety in the world begins to crack with it. Conversations become unpredictable. Familiar faces can suddenly feel distant. Even simple questions can start to feel like pressure. For Rita, silence gradually became the last place of refuge. There is one detail that was mentioned many years later, brief but powerful enough to change the color of the whole story. People said that while watching Gilda, the film that turned her into a legend, Rita asked, "Who is that beautiful woman?" That was not just a sad question. It was the moment the entire tragedy of her life closed into a perfect circle. All her life, Rita had been forced to become an image. She had been reshaped, constructed, pushed into the light as the embodiment of desire and Hollywood beauty. And in the end, she herself could no longer recognize that image as her own. At that point, Alzheimer's was no longer only a personal tragedy. It lifted Rita's story into a much broader human truth. It showed the fragility of memory, the cruelty of being misunderstood, and the terrible price a person pays when the world loves the image too much but never understands the human being enough. For Rita Hayworth, the tragedy was not only losing memory. The tragedy was losing memory of the very legend other people had used to define her whole life. A daughter's love restored her mother's dignity. As Rita Hayworth's illness became more and more visible, the person who became the greatest source of support in her life was no longer Hollywood, no longer the men who had once passed through her life, but her daughter Yasmin Khan. If Rita's early years were marked by her father's control and her years at the top were shaped by the demands of studios and the public, then her final years were held together by something very different: Yasmin's quiet, steady, deeply humane care. She did not stay beside her mother merely as a family member doing what duty required. She became the final shield protecting Rita from the public's curious gaze, from tabloids always ready to twist the truth, and from the false narratives that had damaged her dignity for so many years. Yasmin's role then was far greater than that of a caregiver. She was the witness to Rita's final chapter. She saw clearly the changes in her mother, day by day, saw a silver screen legend slowly drifting away from her own memory, and also saw how the outside world kept misunderstanding what was happening. While many people looked at Rita as nothing more than a fading former star, Yasmin knew her mother was entering an invisible battle that the public at the time did not yet understand well enough to name correctly. Yasmin's presence made Rita's final years less harsh. Rita lived more quietly was asked for, less was pulled into the light, less often. No studio controlled her appearance anymore. There was no longer pressure to be beautiful, to be seductive, to walk into a room as if the whole world had to stop and stare. No one forced her to be perfect anymore. Perhaps for the first time since childhood, Rita was almost allowed to simply exist, not as an icon, but as a human being. That is what makes this period both sad and gentle. Rita forgot many things. She forgot the roles that had made her famous. She forgot the men who had passed through her life. She forgot the battles that had exhausted her, the pains that had cut so deeply into her life. But one thing is often remembered with great emotion: she did not forget Yasmin. In a world of memory slowly falling apart, that bond between mother and daughter remained. It became the most human detail in the final chapter of Rita Hayworth's life. When nearly everything that had built the legend of Rita was being carried away by illness, her love for her daughter remained like the last essential part of the real person inside her. But Yasmin did not only save her mother within the family, she also restored her mother's dignity before the public. By speaking openly about Rita's illness, Yasmin completely changed the way people looked back at her final years. The old cruel remarks, the articles that had once described Rita as unstable, unpredictable, or declining because of alcohol began to be reconsidered. People realized that what they had once mocked or judged was in fact the expression of Alzheimer's. From that point on, Rita's story was no longer just the tragedy of a faded movie star. It became a warning about the cruelty of misunderstanding and, at the same time, a major turning point in public awareness of Alzheimer's. In a very deep sense, Rita Hayworth, though nearly silent in her final years, still helped change the way the world saw this disease. And the person who made that possible was Yasmin, the daughter who refused to let history remember her mother the wrong way. The final legacy of a legend, from the middle of the 1980s on Rita Hayworth's life, had moved very far from the world that once worshipped her as an icon. There were no more revealing gowns, no more flashbulbs, no more premieres where a single turn of her head could silence an entire room. Rita's final years unfolded in quiet, but it was not the kind of quiet that comes from emptiness. It was the quiet of a life that had passed through too many upheavals, too many reinventions, too many roles laid upon both body and soul. The blazing red hair that had once symbolized Hollywood was now only a memory in the public eye. The image of the love goddess that had captivated millions had receded far from the daily reality of her life. But even as that radiance faded, there were still things no one could take from Rita: the elegance in the way she sat, the softness in her presence, and the very particular grace of a woman who had once lived at the center of an entire era of cinema. It was in this period that the real Rita became most visible. Without the cosmetics of legend, without the pressure to maintain an image larger than life, she returned closer to the human self the world had rarely been willing to see. Rita was no longer Gilda, no longer America's wartime dream, no longer the woman expected to walk as if she were an illusion. In her final years, she was simply a human being living out her remaining days in the fragility of memory and the protection of family. That makes Rita's final chapters sad, but not only sad. There is also a certain release in it. After a lifetime of being forced to perform, she was finally allowed to leave the stage. Rita Hayworth died in 1987. That passing closed not only the life of a movie star, but also seemed to close the chapter on one of the great symbols of Hollywood's golden age. When news of her death was announced, the world did not only mourn a film star, it mourned a woman whose life had reflected almost completely both the beauty and the cruelty of classic Hollywood. Rita carried everything that era adored beauty seduction myth, the power to make the public believe that on screen there existed a creature almost beyond ordinary life. But Rita also carried everything that era was willing to crush: a controlled childhood, an altered identity, a private life consumed by others, illness misunderstood, and loneliness hidden behind applause. She was beauty, she was illusion. And more painfully, she was also the price paid for that illusion. Looking back on Rita Hayworth's entire journey, what remains should not be reduced to a familiar rise and fall formula. If her story is told only as a climb to the top, followed by a plunge into darkness, then the most important part is still missing. Rita did not simply rise and fall. She lived between two worlds her entire life. One was the world built for her, where Hollywood decided which hair, which name, which gaze would be packaged and sold to the public. And the other was the real world she quietly held inside, where Margarita Cancino was still there, shy, gentle, vulnerable, and always searching for a kind of freedom she had almost never truly been allowed to have since childhood. On screen, Rita was the embodiment of desire, mystery, and glamour. She entered the frame as if she had been born to belong to the light. But in real life, she was a woman far quieter than the image the world placed upon her. She did not live like the legend the public imagined. She lived like a person constantly adapting to what others wanted from her. That is why Rita Hayworth's story echoes longer than even her films. It forces people to look again at the nature of fame. Fame can lift a person very high enough for the whole world to know the name, but it can also steal the name that person was born with and take away simplicity, peace, and sometimes even the right to be fragile like an ordinary human being. That is why what makes Rita Hayworth immortal is not only her beauty or her status as a screen icon. What keeps her alive is the very real human being behind that light, fragile, wounded, often lost but never completely gone. The world loved Rita's image, but what makes people still remember her today is the truth behind that image. A woman reshaped too many times until she almost lost herself, and who in the end became the face that helped the world understand more deeply the fragility of memory of human identity and of the very idea of legend. Rita may have forgotten the image the world placed on her, but the world never forgot her and never will.
This content is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Thoughtfully compiled from public archives, historical records, and classic articles. While we strive for accuracy and balanced storytelling, some details from Hollywood's golden age remain unconfirmed and should be treated as speculative. We encourage viewers to draw their own independent conclusions. If this journey through Hollywood's shadows resonated with you, please leave a gentle like and subscribe with the bell icon so you never miss our next chapter. To continue uncovering the forgotten tragedies of the Golden Age, simply select the video on your screen right now. Thank you for keeping their memories alive.